Do we even need forests? Notable trees grow in the Bavarian Stregewald Mountains. On an area of about 5 hectares, there are still beeches that have reached 300 years, and some of them are 210 years old. A tourist road leads there, which over the course of 2 kilometers is adjacent to this beech forest, which is surely the oldest in Germany. Unfortunately, in 1990, a hurricane destroyed a third of these huge trees, but the tree stand they create is still impressive. Standing by these huge beech trees, the observer loses track of time. The life of trees is measured by periods other than that of animals and humans. Half a thousand-year-old oaks are still full of life, and linden trees can live up to 1,900 years. In the highlands of California, there are Pinus aristata that are 4,600 years old. It is important to realize that some trees as individuals are already alive as long as the entire documented history of mankind continues. Therefore, it is not surprising that the history of the forest is much longer than the history of man. In Central Europe, the last ice age ended about 12,000 years ago. The glaciers retreated to the north and to the peaks of the Alps. The frozen ground thawed, and frost-resistant trees and shrubs, like birch and hazel, inhabited the area as far as the glacier tongues. About 8,000 years ago, the climate had softened even more. From the south, thermophilic tree species such as elm, ash, linden, and oaks moved to the north. Only 2,000 years ago, the victorious march of beech began, which replaced the mixed oak forests that had prevailed until that time. Only in the mountains, firs and spruces have survived at high altitudes, and in sandy areas, pines. The common history of forest and man began in Central Europe around 3000 BC. The first Europeans initially wandered the forest as hunters and gatherers. However, they did not exert much of influence on forest areas. Only with the development of land cultivation in early Stone Age, part of the forests were cleared. The destruction of forests over large areas began in the Middle Ages. The trees were systematically cut for fuel needed in the salt works and glass production. It wasn't until the 19th century that people realized that forests could not be exploited indefinitely. Soon after, systematic forest management began. In 1980, the first reports of declining forests were published. The release of enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide and other toxic substances into the atmosphere harmed forests during this time more than any other factor in the long history of forests. Only with the development of the foundations of ecology did the forest begin to be properly understood as a structure composed of various communities of plants, animals, and interrelated microorganisms. The communities of life, called biocenosis, together with their habitats, called biotopes, form an ecosystem. What is a forest characterized by? A forest is more than a collection of trees and spaces between trees. Beginning with a certain number of trees, the forest creates its own climate and its own soil in which plant debris decomposes. In the forest, the air humidity is higher than in open space surrounding the forest. Therefore, the temperature fluctuations are smaller. So there are interactions between trees and soil environmental factors and the climate of the area. Thanks to photosynthesis, trees influence the Earth's gas economy. As a result of this amazing synthesis of sugars and carbon dioxide and water, the oxygen necessary for life for animals and humans is released. It is true that trees themselves reuse some of the oxygen they produce because they also have to breathe, but they give the rest to the environment. In addition to animals, a lot of oxygen is consumed mainly by microorganisms when decaying leaves and decaying wood. During this important process, they produce a large amount of carbon dioxide, which in turn is consumed by trees. The energy cycle is complete. What do we need a forest for? 30% of the land part of the earth is covered by forests. Thus, they shape the landscape of many neighborhoods. Some forests are managed forests that mainly produce timber. Many people are employed directly in the forests and forest processing plants. In addition to their important economic function, forests provide a significant amount of oxygen. One grown beech produces about 7,000 liters of oxygen per day, which is as much as 50 people need. So it can be said that the beech forest is the green lungs. For many decades, the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was balanced. Plants took up only as much carbon dioxide as microorganisms, humans and animals produced. Only large-scale production, combustion of oil products and coal in heating devices and car exhaust fumes upset the balance. The share of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is growing at an alarming rate. If the release of carbon dioxide does not decrease radically on the global scale, our climate will change as the many effects of this change are not predictable. In the forests that consume huge amounts of carbon dioxide also die, then we are threatened with oxygen deficiency, which is the most important factor in the life on Earth. Forests absorb almost everything. Their role as an emission filter should not be underestimated. Enormous crowns of millions of leaves reduce the force of the wind, and the leaves are covered with wind-blown dust particles. When it rains, they are washed in the soil, where they form humus. In this way, 1 hectare of beech forest binds about 50 tons of dust per year. One beech filters so many dust particles in a short time that they would form a layer several centimeters thick on the leaves. However, a tree cannot endure such a large amount of pollution indefinitely. It is true that deciduous trees regenerate every year because they shed their leaves in winter, but for conifers that hold their needles for several years, such a large amount of dust pollution is even more harmful. Even if the rain cleans the leaf stomata from time to time, the contamination of trees with dust is dangerous for the plant root system. Some of the pollutants in contact with water create acids that damage the roots of trees. Nobody knows how much trees can withstand airborne, gaseous and particulate pollutants. We must be aware that the limits to withstand air pollution in some regions have already been significantly exceeded. This is evidenced by the skeletons of dead trees in some forests. Without forests, there would be no water in many places. After heavy rain, forest areas store a large amount of water. Mosses can retain 10 times as much valuable water in spaces between the leaves and in their own cells as their own volume. The delicately branched grippers that attach the mosses to the ground have a large surface area and can therefore also absorb significant amounts of water. The water retained in the root zone supplies entire regions. In the soil, the water not only rises or falls, but also flows horizontally, thus feeding the areas adjacent to the forest. Only in forestless areas, the water drains away immediately. Some of the stored rainwater is evaporated in the forest. During a few warm days, a hectare of beech forest gives 30 milliliters of water to the atmosphere, creating specific climatic conditions. The climate and multi-story structure of forests, as well as the richness of niches shaped in them by certain land and food conditions, allow forests to become a habitat for many species of plants and animals. Only the beech forests of Central Europe are home to about 20% of the entire terrestrial flora and 20% of fauna of this altitude. There are about 4,000 species of plants, including 130 species of bacteria, 160 species of lichens, 190 species of algae, and 3,000 species of fungi. In addition, there are 280 species of mosses, 15 species of ferns, and 200 species of seed plants. Contrary to the abundance of trees in forests of America, 8,000 species, only about 50 species of trees, which make up forests, grow in Central Europe. Insects dominate among the 7,000 species of animals living in Europe forests, with 5,200 species. The remaining groups of animals have a numerically diversified representation. 350 species of unicellular species, which may be affected by many as yet undiscovered species. Over 380 species of flatworms and roundworms, commonly known as worms, the number of which may also increase with further discoveries. 70 species of land snails and 560 species of predatory arachids live in the forests. Some species of tardigrades live in water stored in moss carpets. The organisms that decompose the organic substance include 26 species of isopods and 60 millipedes. Terrestrial vertebrates have more than 100 representatives. When comparing a diverse number of species, three groups draw attention: fungi, which, according to the new systematics, are no longer classified as plants, and insects and arachids belonging to the animal kingdom. It is worth realizing that 99% of all biomass in the forest consists of trees, mainly made of cellulose. Mushrooms have the ability to break down cellulose into simple compounds that are reintroduced into a smaller cycle. All animals constitute only 1% of biomass, but they play a significant role. Here are some examples. Butterflies, such as the Christmas tree trunks or the green leaf roll, whose caterpillars often completely eat the leaves of the trees, do not play a major role in the circulation of matter, but contribute to the selection of the most viable trees. Other insects open the way for fungi and microorganisms that decompose them to enter the leaves. Still, others begin the process of decomposing the wood by grinding it, and grave diggers, for example, quickly bury dead animals in the ground and thus put them into circulation of matter. According to the latest research, Mycophyllidea, insects that feed on mycelium, carry spores of cap fungi and contribute to the formation of new mycelium in the forest. For many species of insects, the forest is only a place of hanging, winter shelter, or maturation, and actually they live outside the forest. It is estimated that there are many millions of such migratory insects on a hectare of forest. Birds, such as jay of fieldfare, eating fruit, spread the seeds of trees and thus contribute to their spread to new areas. Forest as a link between different biotopes. A buzzard broods eggs in the forest, but catches mice in the open. The badger sleeps during the day in its underground burrow, but at night it goes out onto meadowns abundant with earthworms. The butterfly that lives in the forest, the silver-washed fritillary, collects nectar from the flowers growing on the edge of the forest, which is a source of energy necessary for flying. Bumblebees establish their underground or arboreal nests at the edge of the forest and then fly in groups in the open space. The animals living in the forest connect the forest with the neighboring biotopes, and that is why the forest edges are inhabited by so many different species.